Hi, my name is Shelley Reed. I am the manager of the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project. We call it Ellison TAP because it's a whole lot easier to say. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a middle-aged white woman with brown shoulder-length hair and glasses. We're here today with a group of great people to talk about collaboration tools, and I'm going to turn it over to Ellen Samuel to introduce the discussion.
Hello, everybody. I am Ellen Samuel. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a white woman with brown hair that's in a ponytail wearing a greenish blue shirt. I welcome everybody to this webinar where we're going to talk about LSNTAP's newest toolkit, which is the collaboration toolkit. And we welcome questions. We are fine with either if you want to raise your hand or unmute and ask questions throughout the presentation, that is fine. Or if you'd like to put them in the chat, I will be monitoring the chat as well. I will be moderating today, and I'm going to pass it over to our amazing speakers, Tony and Rucha. So Tony and Rucha, please introduce yourselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tony Liu. I'm a senior consultant at Just Tech. I use he, him pronouns, and I am an Asian man, clean-shaven and bald, wearing a dark gray collared shirt.
And hey, everybody, my name's Rucha Tandell. I'm also a consultant with Just Tech. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a South Asian Indian woman with black braided hair, and I'm wearing a green shirt and denim jacket.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so the purpose of today's presentation is to really unveil the collaboration toolkit that was designed by LSNTAP and Just Tech, which is really aimed at enhancing the collaboration efforts within legal aid organizations using technology. And the toolkit is really kind of a guide for folks to use to really understand how the introduction of collaboration technologies really affects the legal practice, given how things are evolving so quickly. One of the and as I mentioned, this is really kind of the toolkit is really meant to be like a starting point for organizations to integrate technology into their workflows and to kind of develop a roadmap for getting to a point of really kind of purposeful and intentional collaboration. And and the audience for this is really it's not a very technical toolkit. It's really more kind of targeted at the operational side of things. So organizational leadership, operations managers, and other kind of management level folks who are really kind of tuned into the need for internal communication and improving internal collaboration. So anyone who is kind of more technically oriented, you may find that it's really more sort of kind of workflow and business needs oriented. And an example of kind of why a toolkit like this is necessary, so a lot of organizations have used both Microsoft Teams and SharePoint, right? And they're both powerful tools, but they have a lot of overlapping functionality. So organizations that kind of roll out both of those tools to their staff without providing a lot of training and guidance, it can create a lot of confusion about where collaboration should be happening, or a lot of inconsistencies across the organization. So, so the toolkit is really kind of a guide to start trying to untangle the sort of morass of overlapping functionality of all of the tools that are available. So when we talk about collaboration technologies, we're talking about things like email, your voice over IP telephone system, platforms like Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, project management tools, communication platforms like Slack. And one of the things that sort of made it clear that a toolkit was needed was that these tools are kind of evolving quickly, but also have been widely introduced into the um, legal services realm. And but beyond the sort of fact of their existence, they can also be really beneficial. They can really enhance efficiency and communication, and they're really helpful for kind of developing and fostering a culture of continuous learning and adaptation to different tools. And that's, it's one of the sort of um, necessary sort of culture shifts within legal aid organizations as technology continues to evolve. Um, and I'm just going to take a brief aside to kind of talk a little bit about the ethical considerations when thinking about technology, and why understanding your collaboration tools is relevant to your ethical obligations. So you really, all attorneys have an ethical duty to use technology competently, right? So in particular, the rules of professional conduct state that attorneys must maintain competence by keeping abreast of changes in the law and its practice, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology, right? So it's important that, to the extent that these tools are available to your to any legal aid organization staff, that the organization lays out policies and sort of guidelines for for its staff to use these properly, because client confidential information can be transmitted via these tools or stored in these tools, and so it's important for all of that to be kind of analyzed and thought through properly, and policies developed to ensure that ethical guidelines are being met. And also, your insurance carrier may have particular requirements that require you to think about how you are deploying and using these tools, such as a requirement to maintain a court calendar, right? And that might actually require you to maintain a calendar, duplicate calendars, depending on how you decide to use, for example, say Outlook and your case management system. You might think that it's sufficient to kind of do everything in one platform, but you might need to look at your rules and your insurance carrier's policies to make sure that you're abiding by those.
And throughout the toolkit, you might hear us talk about purposeful collaboration. It's really important that we kind of define purposeful collaboration as a way to be deliberate and intentional about the way that you are using your technology and the tools that you're using, because we want to go ahead and make sure that everybody within your organization has a common goal and shared objective on how they go ahead and use these tools. It's not accidental or kind of haphazard. You want to go ahead and make sure that your intentions for the tools that you're using are clear, and to go ahead and achieve, again, a good collaboration, you want to make sure that these intentions are, shared with everybody, and they are, used to solve a particular problem and kind of ease the workflow of your day-to-day operations. We want to go ahead and let you know that not all one size fits all, and that each organization has to take a look at how their internal processes are, the folks that they have on their team, and kind of help define your organization's culture this way, and use that to present a more purposeful collaboration amongst your organization.
Yeah, and just a word on defining your organization's culture. What we mean by that within the context of these collaboration tools is, do you have a critical mass of people that already do a lot of cross-team collaboration using and communication using tools like this? And I mean something beyond emailing one another, right? So are people already using Teams effectively, defining channels, and clearly kind of using all of the functionality within them to either, push notifications or cross-link to other channels, things like that. Is there already a digital water cooler kind of set up in your organization where people can gather and just chat about things, not necessarily about specific projects or cases, but maybe just sort of organizational kind of water cooler talk? That's, you know, in assessing your own culture and kind of figuring out where you are is one of the first steps to figuring out how do we be intentional about this, because it may be that you already have a head start because you have a lot of folks that already are comfortable with these tools, or you may be starting from a place of we really need to kind of start with basics and get people kind of moving forward. And
Yeah,
a
and
lot
the
of
effort
yeah,
of,
go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. No, I
No.
said in the effort of moving forward, the mindset shift is pretty important, because people that are not going to adopt things right away, especially if they have varying, you know, availability to technology or experience with technology. And so making sure that you take that in mind when defining your your organization's culture, and making sure that you have people to go ahead and train folks and guide them along the way when making these changes with technology or introducing ways to go ahead and collaborate on things.
Yeah, and just to note on the importance of planning and tool selection, you really want to make sure that you are thinking ahead to your administrative capacity to maintain these tools, right? So if you get really ambitious and set up a really complex SharePoint intranet intended for your entire organization to collaborate, and you open it up for everybody to be able to kind of edit and contribute, you may find that you're spending a lot of time trying to kind of manage content and keep things clean. And you may also feel like, oh, wait, we created way too many sites and some of them are going stale. So you really want to think through your capacity and the sort of primary goal that you've set for yourself when using certain platforms or tools.
And one thing to add too is that everybody within your organization might bring a lot of experience. And so taking that in mind of like things that have worked in the past, things that might not have worked in the past, are really helpful in defining that purposeful collaboration as well.
So we'll talk a little bit now about virtual tools for virtual meetings, right? So this is obviously very familiar to everybody since the pandemic, and maybe possibly even before. And this is really the key kind of purpose for these is to provide you with a synchronous engagement experience, right? So video conferencing really kind of makes communication, collaboration, it really enriches that experience by allowing visual interaction, right? You can, you know, for folks to be able to kind of connect with one another. And it's really helpful for, you know, detailed discussions and really kind of, and tying folks together to be able to bridge geographical divide, right? So this allows not only for kind of remote work or hybrid work from the pandemic, but also allows disparate offices of the same organization to feel much more like one unified organization. There's also a lot of key features that you want to think about leveraging when using these types of meeting tools. Screen sharing is obviously one of the key tools that can be used in these platforms for real-time document collaboration, perhaps, or just making sure that everybody's kind of looking at the same thing, much like we are with this webinar at the slides.
Yeah, and another thing that might be useful when especially choosing virtual meetings is keeping in mind your clients and the courthouses as a way of selecting which tool you want. Sometimes you want to make sure that not all of your clients would have access to these tools if they aren't available as an app or on your phone. Sometimes the courthouses use a specific platform, so it might be beneficial to go ahead and explore that platform if so that your clients are more familiar with it before a hearing or anything like that, virtual hearing.
Yeah, so as an example, early on in the pandemic, you know, a lot of people turned to Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Google Meet. So those are some very popular platforms. But where I was working, we discovered that, and we were relying primarily on Microsoft Teams and Zoom. We discovered that with Microsoft Teams, if somebody wanted to have a one-on-one meeting with the client, it required the client to have an account. I think Microsoft has since changed that, but that was sort of a deal breaker in terms of using that with clients. So we had to look to other potential platforms, like the voice over IP system that allowed for video conferencing as well, did have that functionality. So we defined a different, we primarily were relying on Teams internally, but with client meetings, we set up a workflow using our voice over IP system so clients didn't have to create an account. When we're talking about messaging tools, we're talking primarily about written communication, right? And that includes both instant messaging and chat channels and email. These are really indispensable, and they can really help improve communication, but they have to be kind of deployed, and they have to be deployed in a way that provides some guidance to staff. So, obviously you can communicate the same thing in an email that you could through an instant message. So which do you use, right? And so setting out some guidelines for staff to be able to understand, like, maybe use the Teams or Google Meet chat for something that is very quick and would only require a very quick response, or something that is a little bit more time sensitive. And anything that's more long form, put that in an email. Like, so it's kind of trying to lay out some guardrails, because you don't want staff to kind of face a indecision paralysis of like, oh wait, which should I use to just ask so and so if they received the memo that was sent out this morning. Like that's you want to make it as easy as possible for people to know where to put certain communication. And there's always going to be outlier or people who maybe get it wrong, and that's okay, right? Like this is always going to be something where people are kind of learning how to adapt to these things over time.
Right, and that's part of, again, defining your organization's culture. And yeah, those things aren't defined right away either. Like Tony mentioned, it could be you implement something and then you get to get a better definition of how your organization is using these tools and adjust those guidelines based off of it.
Yeah, and you also want to be providing guidance around things like notification settings, right? One of the things that I think turns a lot of people off of tools like Teams or Google Meet or Slack is that they may not know how to configure the notifications, and they feel like they're constantly getting pinged with these notifications, and they're getting distracted and they're being bombarded with them. So making sure that you lay out certain best practices for setting those notifications, and maybe there are certain notifications that everyone should have turned on, just in case there needs to be some sort of like urgent update to all the staff, for example. And I would really kind of also lay out some guidelines and policies on expectations, right? Because I think if you don't, some people may have an expectation that if I send an instant message, you're going to respond, within an hour or so. But you may have the expectation, you may be treating it more like email. And it's like, oh, I'll get to it at the end of the day, I'll look at everything at the end of the day. So kind of trying to lay out like the sort of rules of engagement, so to speak, with the different modes of messaging. So document collaboration has also emerged as a way of, working with one another in almost real time now. In the past, document collaboration kind of was basically, I'll send you a copy of the document, you make your markups, maybe track changes, hopefully, send it back to me, I'll accept the changes. Google Docs was kind of the introduction to a new world of, wow, we can actually edit things together in real time from different computers. And that was pretty amazing. And other platforms have now implemented similar functionality. So documents saved in SharePoint can be edited using Microsoft Word in real time. And Dropbox also has functionality like that. All of these tools will create versions by default. So as different people are making edits, it's creating versions as it goes. So things can be rolled back. If you don't like an edit somebody made, you can always roll that edit back.
Right, and because you have real-time editing now, you want to be very particular about how you roll this out with your staff, because again, since more than one person is, accessing a document, they might be creating copies, saving different versions, or sharing things different places. And so some of the best practices you want to keep in mind is having, reviewing permissions, who needs access to what documents, can everybody access the same document? Do you want to be able to have folks share documents with other folks internally or externally? You want to go ahead and keep in mind where these files are being saved, and if there should be a particular file structure to them, whether it's based on a unit, the type of casework you're doing, or just some sort of firm-wide file naming convention to help you organize those documents as well.
Yeah, so this necessitates a move to cloud-based storage of your files, which is, there's a huge change management component to that, right? So you really want to, it's a big shift for a lot of us who grew up in the era of floppy disks, to understand that if I want somebody to work on something, I don't
You
send
mean
them a
the save
copy.
button?
Yeah, the thing that you click to save, that's what a floppy disk used to look like. But instead of actually attaching a file to an email, I'm sending you a link to that document, right? And that's a big shift for a lot of folks. And then rather than downloading a copy and making my changes, I'm making changes directly to the same document, because I'm trusting that the autosave is going to create a new version, and that, if for whatever reason my changes are not the ones that should be kept, they can be rolled back. So it is really kind of a big culture shift, and it's something where we found that it does kind of disrupt people's workflows and how they're used to working on documents. So it is definitely, if there's any one area where intentionality and being clear about your policies is kind of one of the most important to your day-to-day work, it's really with document collaboration.
While we talk about collaboration, we did want to go ahead and take a moment to talk about some project management tools and how task management and collaboration on various tasks that you might have. And so while all of you might be working off of legal matters, we realize that not all of your organization is working on legal matters, and you might have various non-legal projects or various other things that you want to go ahead and track tasks on to make sure that you're going ahead and making sure that those items are reviewed and taken care of. And so in order to go ahead and keep track of progress and deadlines, there are various tools like Trello, Asana, Airtable, and ClickUp that can help you keep track and prioritize, assign, create deadlines, and share these tasks with folks who are on those tools as well. But we realize that, again, not all of you have the need to have a separate PM tool. And so it could be useful to already take a look at the subscriptions that you have. There's cases like the Microsoft Task or Planner, which you can go ahead and use to go ahead and keep track of things or assign things out to folks. Again, because not all of you need to implement something more holistic, kind of defining what your PM needs are. Well, who are the folks that need access to these PM tools, and then deciding whether it's worth, purchasing another subscription to a PM tool or using something that you might have internally is a good way to go ahead and look at that. And then Another thing to go ahead and do is if you do have another PM tool already and you're already using SharePoint or Microsoft, there's a lot of integrations that you can have between the two. And so that might be another way to go ahead and implement these PM tools onto your sites. Again, with project management, there is a lot of like skill development as far as effective project management. And it's nice to have an individual or group of people within your organization that already has that skill set and can help use these tools to better keep track of your tasks and, optimize the tools that are available. Because then, again, when you share out or integrate these tools, you have already defined what your organization needs, and then be able to go ahead and share out the tools with your staff and how you should be using them. Again, with everything that we've talked about, there's always the caution about the integration and the safety issues that there might be. So again, if you're sharing things externally or have other folks that are part of the project that you're going to go ahead and roll out, making sure that they have the right permissions and making sure that they are able to go ahead and access the right information as needed. We did have a project management toolkit, and I believe Shelley also put that in the chat. But they are looking to develop a project management curriculum to go ahead and build off of these skills. Yeah.
Yeah, and just a word about these platforms. I mean, there's a pretty high cost of entry to using these, and I don't mean like licensing costs. I mean, in terms of setting it up properly for a team to actually be able to collaborate, you have to really think through how you want to configure it, how you want to use custom fields, how you want to define things, which is really more about project management skills and less about the technology, right? So you may find that it's better to start doing project management just with like an Excel file or and then figure out, okay, what does this not solve for us? So for one example could be I've done a lot of project management with Excel documents or Google Sheets, and one of the challenges is you can't the commenting on a particular line is challenging. You get people having to do like the shift enter so that they can do a line break and then typing their initials and the date and then saying, adding their comment. These project management tools can really help with that, so that comments about a specific task are kind of threaded and have their own kind of comment section. That would be a reason to kind of upgrade from something simple like an Excel sheet to a tool like this. But I wouldn't kind of dive head first into something like Airtable or Asana unless you absolutely have a need to use something like that.
Did want to take a moment to talk about external collaboration. Purposeful collaboration isn't also important to isn't important just internally, but also with your external stakeholders. And again, it's going back to those initial slides about defining the culture and making sure that you know who the users are on the external end, so that you can go ahead and provide them with the assistance or tools necessary to go ahead and collaborate with you too. Especially when we talk about external collaboration, security is a big factor because you are either sharing sometimes case-related information out to folks, or you are receiving files from folks externally that you want to make sure are secure. Then accessibility is a huge thing as well. Again, making sure that whatever platforms or tools that you're using are accessible to your clients or those external stakeholders. And then if it becomes, like, say you do choose to share things via Teams or via Google instead, making sure that if a majority of your clients are using Teams versus Google, what Google versus Microsoft has as far as permissions when sharing that out, what kind of security that they have, and if they have accessibility through apps so that folks can access things on their phone instead of having to log in onto a laptop somewhere. And again, we define keeping in mind the different use cases for external sharing. like your clients, any pro bono attorneys, adverse parties, board members. These are all external stakeholders, and it can be really useful to define these different use cases, because then it can help build the guidelines for how these things are shared. So for example, if you wanted to share case related information with a client versus a board member, if you wanted to share information or documents with a board member, it might make sense to have two separate external sharing sites, one for board members to particularly access in order to go ahead and, access resources, versus a different external site just for clients who might be accessing case-related material.
And so to give an example of why thinking through your use cases is important, to kind of help you with your technology strategy, we've worked with clients who use Google Workspaces, for Gmail, for Google Calendar, for their documents, a lot of their documents and internal communications. When it comes to external sharing, one of the big challenges using Google Workspace in the legal context is, the Google Docs format is not really a standard in the legal profession, whereas Microsoft Word is sort of the de facto standard for editing and creating documents. And so we've worked with people who will maintain Google as their kind of primary platform, but must still maintain a SharePoint site, or a SharePoint kind of component where they're storing a lot of the documents that they may be collaborating externally with other co-counsel or government agencies, if it's like policy related work, because a lot of those other organizations can't use Google to edit or access documents. So really defining those use cases is really going to help you figure out which platforms should we use for for what, and then establishing those boundaries.
So kind of taking a step back and talking about just the advantages of collaboration softwares is, like we talked about, it streamlines your workflows and it improves your communication and teamwork, because if you are using one platform for communication, it kind of centralizes how that communication is happening, and then it's easier to go ahead and find where that communication happened and track back where you were messaging somebody, instead of like having to sift through your emails. You're like, okay, for these specific topics, we as an organization have decided to use Teams instead. And so it makes it easier to go ahead and figure out where these multiple types of communication are happening. It's a lot more efficient to not to have to switch between multiple different applications if you're using one specific collaboration software. And then, as we talked about, it enhances data security and compliance, but specifically also with their document sharing. People are working off of one document, collaborating together. It makes it easier for them to go ahead and make those changes to a document instead of having to email it back and forth. It might save on your storage and space too, instead of having to go ahead and upload multiple versions of a document. And then with all of these things in mind, it hopefully should improve your organization's productivity. It gives you all a better chance to work remotely more effectively, and gives your staff more flexibility when working on these tools. I will also add that with collaboration software, it's a good way to go ahead and keep track of your knowledge sharing and be able to go ahead and learn from each other, because again, all of these communications are happening in one place, and so the proper use of these tools will kind of help like foster that knowledge sharing within the organization, and that can really help your client services too if more people are aware of the other things that people are doing.
So there are a lot of challenges when we talk about implementing communications and collaboration strategies within an organization. There's a lot, potentially there's a lot of resistance to change, right? It is hard to, muscle memory is really powerful, right? And if you're used to, one of the sort of prime examples, when you switch to storing documents in SharePoint and you are editing documents saved there, right? By default, the online version of Word and now your desktop version will autosave by, and many of us are used to using an old, maybe, letter to a client as an exemplar for the new letter to the client that I'm writing, but we're used to saving at the end of editing. Um, and so it's a big shift for some of us to remember, okay, I'm going to open this document, but the first thing I'm going to do is create a copy and then I'm going to edit it, right? And like for me, it took me probably well over a year before I finally got it into my head. Oh, I need to save first, then edit, or make a copy first and then edit. So there can be a lot of resistance to change because it introduces the sort of these hurdles to your kind of your flow. And there's a lot of security concerns when implementing these collaboration tools. There's a really high risk of sensitive or confidential information being compromised accidentally. So making sure that the tools are being chosen properly, or carefully, that they're configured properly, and that data ownership and the right and or ability to delete or destroy that information, all of that should align with your firm's retention, your organization's retention and information destruction policies. And so along with this comes the sort of the vastly increased responsibility to make sure that you define your permissions, and your access rules properly. Every platform has different permission settings. Every platform requires you to go in and dial those in properly for your particular uses. And it's not just, centrally setting those permissions for the organization just once, right? So if you're talking about something like SharePoint, you may have to change settings for every single site that you set up, depending on what the purpose of that site is. Can people share files externally from this site or not? If not, is there a place for them to share externally? So then they need permissions that are locked down in one site, but opened up a little bit on the other. So really kind of taking the time to map out those permissions is really crucial.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
And I'll just again reiterate that having the capacity to go ahead and keep up with these changes, roll them out, manage the permissions. We realize that people within legal services always wear more than one hat and are doing way more than their role just says. And so that can be a challenge when implementing collaboration tools, is making sure that you have the capacity to update these tools, make sure that they're rolled out properly, have the support to go ahead and troubleshoot them if people are having issues. And so that does add to kind of the stress of rolling them out. But again, if they are implemented correctly and you have the right guidelines and folks in place to go ahead and help troubleshoot, it can be really useful in also kind of helping your operations and speeding things up.
Yeah, and there have been a lot of presentations on change management, and to borrow from some of the strategies, one of the ways to kind of really address the resistance to change and to really drive adoption is to think about creating examples so that people can see how the tool should be used, right? Don't just roll out a blank slate and then expect people to understand it. And if that means populating a collaboration tool with, a fake project, or just like creating a channel that is, about just, and you start talking about like, did you see the latest episode of, whatever popular TV show is on right now, and people can kind of understand that the how these tools can be used to create connection and engagement. And also identifying within your organization cheerleaders or enthusiasts, right? People who are going to be adopters of this and really help to drive it, so that others can kind of watch from the sidelines and recognize, oh, okay, this is how this can be really used. And I would always consider doing regular tech kind of check-ins with staff to see how things are going with a particular implementation, just to get feedback, right? I think it's really confusing that we have Yammer enabled on SharePoint. I don't know what it's for. And that might be like, oh, okay, so we need to provide some contextual guidance. Maybe next to where Yammer is visible on the SharePoint page, we put some, a 2-sentence kind of explanation for what should be used or what should be put in there. Those are the kinds of things that you may not realize when you're first implementing, but unless you create an opportunity for people to provide feedback easily, you may not recognize that it, as simple as just writing 2 sentences on the on a SharePoint page would really make it a lot easier for people.
Just looking into the future, as you are all aware, technology is constantly changing, constantly updating. And so as we look to the future, again, we want you to use the toolkit as a roadmap for this collaboration, because even though you've rolled out guidelines and policies for your staff, you may need to go ahead and revisit those as the technology changes, as your collaboration tool changes. And so making sure that the training and the guidelines that you go ahead and have with your staff is like a phased implementation, so that if there is any changes along the way, again, with your staff, you can go ahead and make those improvements. But even with the technology as it changes, having a phased implementation will allow you to go ahead and get people more up to speed a little bit quicker, because of the rollout, the way that you phased out the rollouts. And again, as we talk about future changes, there are so many things to keep in mind, like document automation, AI, virtual assistants, the use of data analysis tools. And yeah, Tony, I'll let you go ahead and get into.
Yeah, so on the topic of artificial intelligence, I mean, I think we've all kind of been inundated with information and news about how AI is changing, the way everybody does their work. In particular, when it comes to collaboration and knowledge management, I think AI is going to create some kind of significant changes. And we know that Microsoft has the intention of rolling out AI within a lot of its applications, and SharePoint. When it gets turned on in SharePoint, that could be a new avenue or a new, almost a new requirement for an organization to train their staff on the proper use of, using Copilot within SharePoint. Though from our initial kind of analysis, it will really benefit organizations that have a ton of documents or a ton of information within SharePoint, to be able to really find information, find documents. One expected use that we think will kind of proliferate very quickly is, instead of having a structured, organized brief bank, you probably could just dump all of your documents in a single SharePoint site, possibly in different document libraries, but use AI almost as like a really powerful advanced search to find, like, give me a sample of a motion to dismiss in a housing case that was that's not older than 5 years, and without you having to browse or just run a search and go through 100 results to find the one that you want. Implementation of AI will I think really help with a lot of these types of tasks. Yeah, so I think that brings us to an end. We have a lot of time, or about 15 minutes, I think, for questions. We'd love to hear from you guys, whether you have any thoughts about what we've talked about already, or if you have specific questions about any of the tools that we were covering.
Or any successful stories of collaboration.
Or any horror stories of
Yeah.
collaboration. We did have Cindy in the chat who just mentioned that Teams doesn't require an account anymore,
Right.
But that also there's some struggles. It seems like people still think Teams is hard, and that Zoom is easier.
Right.
And I think we've also seen that in our work as well.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to that whole change management and sort of driving adoption thing. One thing that can be really effective, I think, is recording a screencast of the process of setting up a Teams meeting or starting a Teams meeting with external people, so that people can just, see it. There is definitely a mental block, though, based on what functionality was already there, or what functionality a platform started with. I think everybody had that experience at the beginning of the pandemic of just being thrown into this world of everything is now remote, and I have to figure out these platforms and what they do and how they do it. And everyone was using something different. I mean, largely it was like Zoom or Teams, but I think there was always kind of having to adapt to lots of different changes all at the same time. And then these platforms started evolving very quickly, started copying features from each other and really trying to kind of improve. But then it often got fixed in people's heads. Oh, Teams doesn't do this, or Zoom doesn't do this, or, and it can kind of be hard to get past that.
Absolutely.
So
Oh yeah, go ahead, Rucha.
in the chat, there was a question. Do you have any recommendations for how to keep your training materials up to date as practices and policies and tools change over time? Yeah.
I know what Ellen would say, which is that
Wait,
AI
what would I say? Oh yeah.
AI is honestly probably going to be the best and easiest way to keep those support materials up to date, because it's just going to be much more powerful in terms of leveraging the collective knowledge about things that's out there on the internet, and synthesizing it into concise kind of guidance. And I'm not saying that you should just turn AI loose and whatever it comes up with is your guide, are your materials. You obviously would want to vet everything and edit it, but I think that's probably an area where leveraging artificial intelligence will help you save a lot of time, rather than you trying to figure out what the latest version of Teams introduced and how that changes things.
Yeah, and I would also add that, like, you do compliance reviews for your cases, having some sort of like check-in to make sure that your policies are also relevant and those guidelines are also up to date is just a good way to fix that tool with AI and just check in with folks internally.
And externally, right? So I think this is a great opportunity for legal aid organizations to work together to use kind of those economies of scales to do the trainings, to update your materials. Your policies and your materials aren't going to be exactly the same, but if you're working together and sharing these things on LSNTAP, for example, really saving that time and that efficiency to see what other people are doing, and working together to make sure those things stay up to date. That can be a great opportunity for that external sharing and collaboration as well.
Yeah, and Phil has a question about version tracking and sort of automatic versioning, and how do you get yourself to kind of trust it rather than constantly wanting to save as a new version. I don't have a great answer to that, other than to kind of, one thing that you might do is just look at a document that you've been editing over not just a single session, right? Over the course of several sessions, over many days or weeks, go back and look at those versions and see how kind of granular those saves are being made, to give you the confidence that you're not losing anything, right? Like, I mean, with Google Docs, I don't know how frequently it's creating versions, but you know, in terms of collaboration, every keystroke is visible to your collaborators. With Microsoft Word, those with documents kind of shared, saved in SharePoint or in OneDrive, the versions are being created, I think, in a frequency of almost like every 2 minutes or so, um, depending on how much editing is happening. And as long as it's set up to create those versions automatically and properly, I have not seen any scenario where that versioning has failed. You can even get kind of deeper into the weeds with the versioning to have it create minor versions versus major versions. um, and there's ways to configure that so it sort of will help you kind of subdivide the version changes and group them in kind of a more sort of granular versus larger change kind of distinctions. And so it really is important to to make that shift so you're not, you know, opening a document and then creating and going save as, and then, you know, then typing in like Phil's edits May 21st, 2024, because then what is the document, right? What file represents the actual document? The whole point of this is to try to converge on there's a single source of truth for what the motion to dismiss is, because then you're getting away from having lots of different versions that could cause confusion, and you know, and it gets you also away from needing to come up with naming conventions to indicate the different versions, which can be really hard to enforce.
I just to share a personal thing is I actually have had twice in the last few months Excel issues where somebody had not shared something properly with me, and for some reason the save did not. I think they said did it on their OneDrive or something, and the autosave was not on. So you know, I think it is still a good idea to check and just make
Right.
sure that it is saving somewhere, because that's happened to me. I'm sure it was user error in our system somewhere, and how whoever created the document. I'm not going to own up to it myself, but I definitely lost a bunch of work because that autosave was not on. So it is not on all of the time.
Yeah, it can be set to be on by default. It can also be set to be off by default. And I've worked with clients who've asked to have it turned off by default because that's what they're used to, and I've talked them out of it because of the versioning, right?
Right.
Because if you turn it off by default, it's a harder lift for people to remember to turn it on than it is for people to started editing and realized, oh, I want to make a copy, and then the person who, you know, whoever owns that original document can always roll back if they need to, or you know, you train people on how to roll it back. But yeah, it is important to kind of check to make sure that that it's it's either saving automatically because you want it to, or if for whatever reason you don't want it to, you turn it off.
But we understand why you're skeptical, and going back to Pat's comment, everything is better than Microsoft.
Well, but see, that's the real thing, right? With Google Docs, I think it never was an issue for people because it was always cloud-based, and so people
Right.
would just adapted to the fact that, oh, with Google Docs, once you start typing, the changes are there and then it's saving automatically. I think it's because Microsoft Word, everybody started with a file on a drive, and now they're trying to push people towards the Google collaboration model, and there's a mental disconnect between, you know, wait, but this is Word, I have to save as, and I have to save a new version, and then just put, you know, change the file name.
Absolutely. Did anybody have any other questions or want to share any particular successes or challenges that their organization has faced?
I mean, I also, I guess I'll wrap by saying that we recognize that nobody is starting from zero, right? Everybody is already, and I think the context for us creating this toolkit was the reality that we all faced, which is that we were thrown into this digital collaborative world unexpectedly, and every organization is going to have a lot of work to do to kind of untangle things a bit and then sort of re-implement in a way that is a little more effective. And so you know, we recognize that everybody has some level of familiarity with all of this. It's just a question of has has your organization or have you taken the time to step back and kind of assess and take a look at everything and say, okay, what can we be doing better with these tools? And that's kind of the sort of how the toolkit came to be.
Well, I don't
Okay.
see any other questions. So if there aren't any, we're just going to go ahead and say thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Tony and Rucha and Ellen, for sharing all of these thoughts with us and all your work on the collaboration toolkit. We hope that it's great help for you. And I'm excited to be rolling out some changes at Ellison Tap. We have a new logo that will be introduced shortly. So stay tuned for all that's coming new from Ellison Tap in the future. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Shelley.
Sure.